live in a world full of opportunities, in a world where ideas and technologies flow in great amount, in a world where, thanks to approaches like open innovation or crowdsourcing, nowadays companies can post their problems to websites and receive thousands of ideas. So what's the consequence of this? What's the consequence of living in a world where ideas and technologies flow in great amounts? Well, the consequence is that ideas nowadays are cheap. It's easy to have ideas. So how do we make a difference? How do we compete in a world where having ideas nowadays is so easy? I want to tell you something about my past 10 years of research I've been conducting at the crossroad between technologies and design. And what I learned from these 10 years of research is that the companies that often succeed are not the companies that are the first companies who have a technology. Companies who succeed are the first companies that find the right applications of the technology. The company that makes sense of this wealth of opportunities. So we will talk about technologies, yes, but we'll talk about technology plus. Actually, I will talk a lot about the plus. And the plus is that the companies who succeed are the companies that make sense of technology, companies that find the most meaningful applications. And the first story I want to tell you is this story. You definitely know this product. This product is called Nintendo Wii. And it's a great example of how to succeed by giving meaning to technologies. You know that the Nintendo Wii is very successful as a product. It sells double the volumes of the other competitors, which are the Microsoft Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3. And why it is so successful? It is not because just of the technology. The Nintendo Wii is not more powerful than the PlayStation 3 or the Xbox. Actually, it's much less powerful. It is not because Nintendo invested more in innovation. Actually, Sony and Microsoft invested much more in technology development because of the very powerful integrated circuit that they had to develop. So it's not because of this. Why the Nintendo Wii is so successful? The reason is that the Nintendo Wii is an experience that is much more meaningful to people, to users. Before the Wii, the other two companies, they invested in very powerful technology for doing computational analysis because, they went to the basement of the houses of teenagers that were doing market analysis. And by doing market analysis, what they learned is that teenagers, they were in their basement playing with their consoles. And actually, they were not there. They were immersed into the video screen because they were entering into a virtual world. Playing with the game console meant to enter into the screen, into a virtual experience. Teenagers, when they shoot with their games, they want to see the blood. So they want to have a lot of computational analysis. To simulate games like this, you need to have a lot of power. The Nintendo Wii is much less powerful, but the experience is totally different. Playing with a Nintendo Wii means to move. You play tennis by swinging your arm. You work out, you sweat, and you even socialize better with other people because it's easier to play. So Nintendo transformed the meaning of a console from entering into a virtual world to stay here and socialize better. So the innovation here is not an innovation simply on technology. This innovation is an innovation in the meaning of things. They have totally radically changed the meaning of a gaming experience. And this is a great example of what design is. I told you I've been doing research for 10 years on the crossroad between technology and design, and the Nintendo Wii is a great example of design. Because design, in its essence, the major meaning of design is that design comes from a Latin word which is designare, and designare means designate, give meaning to things. in English, we still use this word, designate, when we want to give meaning to something. You know, I designate you the King of England by using a crown. You know, the crown is the sign that we use to give meaning to the King of England. So I use often this definition by German theorists who say it's simply, in its essence, design is about making sense of things. It's not about the beauty of things, it's not about style, it's not about technology. Design is about making things more meaningful to people. And the Nintendo Wii is like this. It's an experience which is much more meaningful. It's not more powerful, it's not more stylish, it's more meaningful. And there are many, many examples of products who succeed in the market because they are more meaningful. This is another interesting example. This is an application by an American company called Intuit. And this product is QuickBooks. QuickBooks is an accounting application for small businesses. So this is a product not for consumers, but for businesses. Also, business-to-business products have meanings, of course. And the innovation that this company did is that before them, actually, the founder of this company, Scott Cook, once told me that when they entered the industry, they were the 28th company selling accounting applications to small businesses. But the other companies were saying to a person, you know, do you want to do accounting? Then you buy our application, because we do application for accounting. Intuit, instead, went into the market and said, you don't want to do accounting? Then you buy application. Because, you know, architects or carpenters or small businesses, they don't want to do accounting. They want to be architects. So they radically changed the meaning, Intuit radically changed the meaning of what an accounting application is. In this case, not something for doing accounting, but something actually to take ease of people that don't want to do accounting. It's very simple. It's a great experience. You know, it's fast. It's not very sophisticated. You don't do the best accounting you can, but who cares? An architect don't want to be an accountant. So there are innovations in meaning in every industry, in every product, in every service. So if you think about the strategy of innovation of a company, typically we can think about the strategy of innovation through these two dimensions. On the one hand, we have innovation in technologies. And innovation in technologies can be incremental or radical. You know, you can radically invent, you know, the first mobile phone in the world, and then you can incrementally improve mobile phones through the technology. But there is another dimension. And the other dimension is the innovation of meanings. And also innovation of meaning can be incremental or radical. You know, incrementally means that, you know, once you have invented the Nintendo Wii, you can incrementally add new games, new kind of experience. But the first time that Nintendo created this experience of doing game console that allows you to make workouts and socialize better, that was a radical change in meanings. And every company in any industry must have this kind of framework when they do innovation. You can look for new technologies, but you can also look for new meanings. And what is interesting, especially for this event, you know, we are here to think about technology plus, and the plus is the meaning. And often, companies who compete in high-tech industries, they just focus on technologies. They basically play a strategy which is a strategy of technology substitution. They try to substitute old technologies with new technologies, but they keep the meaning untouched. This was what Sony and Microsoft did. You know, they didn't change the meaning of a game console. They wanted to have virtual reality, and they pushed and invested a lot simply to substitute the old technology with a new one without changing the meaning. But what is very interesting is actually every technology, every technological opportunity hide a much more interesting possibility for applications. And so always what is interesting is that you can use technologies to create new meaning. Technologies actually can enable us not to make old experiences better, but to create new experiences. And actually this is what Nintendo did. They, instead of what Nintendo did is that they used a technology provided by a French-Italian company called ST Microelectronics. This technology is called accelerometer. The accelerometer is a little chip that is inside the controller of the Nintendo Wii, and when you move the controller, the accelerometer sends the movement. So they use this technology to create a complete new experience. This is the tech and the plus. And what is funny is that ST Microelectronics went to Microsoft first. This little company that had this device went to Microsoft to propose this kind of new experience. And Microsoft said, you know, we are not interested. We are investing in a very powerful chip to have very fast virtual reality. So the point, as I said before, is not to have the idea, because the idea was there on the desk of Microsoft. They said no. Nowadays, the point is not to have the idea, is not to have the technology, because there are a lot of ideas and technologies. The point is how we can make sense of this wealth of opportunities. So why some companies are capable of recognizing the opportunities and other companies see the idea, they have the idea there, but they don't see the opportunity. And often, the companies that succeed in the long term is not the company that have the technology, but the company that find the right applications. So there are many, many examples of innovations like this. So how can you find this kind of application? How can you recognize the opportunities? There are basically two imperatives in the world of innovation nowadays. The first one is that innovation must be user-centered. So to be innovation, you must start from the user, understanding the user. And the second one is that you need to have a lot of ideas. You already saw that having ideas is not so, of course you need to have ideas, but you need to recognize the value. So how can you recognize the values? Maybe you should start from the users. Well, users can help a lot, customers can help a lot when it comes to incremental innovation. But when it comes to radical innovation, especially when you want to radically change the meaning of things, users don't help. Because Sony and Microsoft went to the basement of teenagers, and what they learned is that what teenagers wanted, to have more virtual reality. You don't invent the Nintendo Wii by taking pictures of teenagers in their basement. Because the more you get close to users, the more you get immersed into the current experience. It's hard to invent something new. And this is what Nintendo said, we didn't do focus groups or something like that. We worked a lot with game developers. They worked with the supplier of technology. They created new scenarios that were totally different from what users want. The same from the suppliers of the technology. They say, you never ask a client a specific feature or component. If you wait for your client to ask you something, it's because probably this client has already seen this application somewhere else, and maybe just asking for a lower price. You have to propose new experience. Don't wait for your customer to come to you. It's too late. Waiting for your customers, listening to your customers is great if you want to do incremental improvement, but if you want to do radical change, you always stay back. And you were talking about Steve Jobs and Apple before, and what is very funny is that Apple is the quintessential not user-centered company. They don't listen to us. We are listening to Apple. If you remember when Apple introduced the iPad, in January, everyone was waiting on the web and on screens to listen what Steve Jobs was saying to us. We listen to him. He doesn't listen to us. This is very funny. In 2008, when he introduced the MacBook Air, it showed the MacBook Air. The MacBook Air is very thin, doesn't have any DVD drive inside. And he said, why there's no DVD drive? Because we think that you will not need it. Which means I think that you will not need it. But anyway, this is definitely a company that is radical because not listening to users. So what we have learned is that when you want to be radical in innovation, you don't start from that. There are three different types of innovation. One is technology push, engineers doing research in their laboratories. Then there is innovation which is typically called market pool or user-centered is innovation that comes from users, and it tends to be very incremental. But innovation that radically changes the meaning of things is an innovation that is pushed by a vision. I call it design-driven because it's a new meaning driven, pushed by a companies. So how do you achieve that? Well, after 10 years of study, what we have learned is that instead of getting close to users, these companies get close to interpreters. Every company is surrounded by a number of other people, other companies, other institutions that can help to interpret how people could give meaning to things. Let's make a little example. You just have lunch, and I'm Italian. Let me talk a little just about, at least for 1 minute, about Italy. And let's consider a company like Barilla. Barilla is doing pasta. It's a very famous company doing pasta in Italy. If you are Barilla and do pasta, if you take pictures of people cooking pasta, yeah, maybe you can make a pasta that has a different shape, something incrementally better. But if you want to create new experiences, you step back, and what you see is a person, maybe a woman, at home at 7 o'clock in the night, and this person wants to have a better experience of cooking and eating with their family. So Barilla is not the only company looking at that experience. There are other companies that investigate the same experience. For example, Whirlpool is doing appliances, but also Whirlpool is interested of making a person who's cooking and eating with the family to make these people feel better. Whirlpool is participating to the same experience of Barilla. Barilla is doing pasta, Whirlpool is doing appliances, but they are participating to the same experience. They are making research on the same experience. And for example, Alessi is an Italian company doing kitchenware. Also Alessi does research on how people cook and eat. So Alessi can be a great interpreter for Barilla. So what these companies do, they are looking for the interpreters. Other companies, other players, designers, in the case of food, chef, researchers, who are making investigation on the same person in the same context that we are investigating. They can help. If they are doing research, they can help us to understand how people give meaning to things. Because they look at the same people in the same context. So, there are a few hints that I have discovered in these 10 years of research about how to find these interpreters. There is a book that I published 1 year ago about design-driven innovation, how you can find interpreters, which actually has been right now translated in Korean, so it could be easily accessible around. One thing that is very interesting, that I would tell you just 2 hints. The first hint is that interpreters are not the most famous one. You don't have to look for the most famous people to get new interpretation. This is a very nice story. It's a company in the US called Lucesco. Lucesco is a company that wanted to enter into a new industry, so they wanted to design lamp. If you want to design lamp, you maybe, as a CEO, you want to hire the most famous designer of lamp. Most famous interpreter. And so this is what Lucesco did. They hired Richard Sapper, that guy up there. Richard Sapper is very famous because in 1972, he designed this famous iconic lamp for Artemide, which is an Italian company. He is a great lamp designer. He used to be a very great lamp designer. And after 33 years, what Richard Sapper did is this. Nothing new. Because if you call someone famous, it means that he has been famous in the past. He's not the famous of the future. So you get old interpretation. You need to find new interpreters. Interpreters that your competitors don't talk to. You need to receive new interpretations. And so this is what Steve Jobs did in 1998-6 when he came back to Apple. And when he came back to Apple, he needed to hire a new vice president of design, a new chief designer. And he hired Jonathan Ive, who is a British designer, and the Imac was the first product that Jonathan Ive designed. And if you remember, everyone was shocked, the first time ever a computer is colored and translucent. Wow! a big innovation. So many people don't know that before joining Apple, Jonathan Ive had a design company. His name was Tangerine. And he was not a computer designer. He was known to be a bathroom designer. So only Steve Jobs could do something like that. You come back to your company, and instead of hiring the most famous computer designer, you hire the bathroom designers to design computers. Is that crazy? No, it's totally right. Because if you hire another computer designer, you will not, even if you hire the most famous computer designer, you will have the typical black, boring computer for offices. But that was 1996, and the webs were starting to arrive. And if in their era of the web, people started to use computers at home. Because of entertainment, because of work, but people were starting to use computers at home because they had the network. And if you use the computer at home, you need someone who speaks the languages of home. You need a designer who knows the languages of home, who can interpret the languages of home. Then you need a bathroom designer. Could it be a bathroom designer, a kitchen designer, whatever it is, but someone who knows the languages of homes. That is a new interpreter. And in fact, if you look at the iMac was using the same materials, the same colors, exactly the same colors of objects that were in our houses even from 6-7 years before the iMac. All those products up there are from the early 90s. So Apple was taking explicitly inspiration from objects in our home. It's a matter of right interpretation, finding the right interpreters. So what we have learned? What we learn is that, first of all, if you want to win in innovation, you need the technology, but you also need the plus. And the plus is the capability to find the right meaning associated to your technology. What is the most meaningful application? That's the most important challenge. Ideas now, they are cheap. Finding the direction is much more difficult. Second, if you want to do something radical, you don't have to get close to users. Actually, you have to step back from users and looking at big scenarios. Third, how can we look at the big scenarios? Well, there are a lot of interpreters, other institutions, organizations, people that look at the same experience, and they can help us to interpret the same experience from different perspectives. The most important thing is that to have novel interpretation, you don't have to talk to the same people and the same interpreters that your competitors talk to. You need to look outside of the network. We use always the word thinking outside of the box. What I suggest you, search for new talent, for new interpreters outside of the network, outside of the typical circles where all your competitors look at you. Thank you very much.